Good head, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, this impromptu live stream chat with none other than Dr. Joseph P. Farrell. Joe from the Carolinas here. Welcome to the Ab Paranormal Podcast. How y'all doing? Helping you confront the Ab Paranormal with reason, logic, and common sense, which is severely lacking in today's day and age, especially in the area of SSP and UFO disclosure psyops. Joseph Farrell, uncensored. Now, folks, Joseph Farrell, you may know this gentleman as having written several million books by now, at least several million pages, and just has a heck of a time and a beautiful choice in various different hats. And a really delightful sense of humor. But seriously, he also just happens to have a doctorate degree in patristics, which is the study of the fathers of the church. Is that right, Dr. Farrell?
Yeah, it sounds like a horribly specialized degree. It actually isn't. It's pretty demanding. You have to have languages, Latin and Greek, obviously. Hebrew and Coptic doesn't hurt either, although my Hebrew could probably start a war, and my Coptic is non-existent. And you have to have a lot of languages. You have to know a lot of classical and medieval philosophy, history of science, law. It's a very it's actually a demanding degree, but it really has kind of prepared me well for doing all this wacky, strange, weird stuff I write about, because you're trained in research methods and citation and connecting dots, which is probably what I do in this weird series of books that I've written. But it's been very helpful in that respect.
Yeah.
And I while we're talking about secret space programs and sphere being alliances and all of this other stuff, I was on Richard Dolan last night, and before I went on his show, I was looking up spheres. Plato talked about souls as spheres, and Origen, one of the early ecclesiastical writers, kind of picked up on it. And there's even a reference to it in the 10th anathema of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. So I'm like, okay. Wow. If you're gonna trademark this and prevent people from talking about it, you got to sue the Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Church of England.
We could start a holy war over this trademark.
That's right, we could. That's right. So I just thought, this is kind of wacky, but no, I was talking to you before we started the stream, and I didn't even know any of this was really going on. I'd heard about Corey Goode, but, I'm doing my thing. I don't pay any attention to that stuff. And that's probably my selection bias, because I look at this whole whistleblower phenomenon. I'm definitely on the Catholic sacramental side of things. I want my nuts and bolts and my documents and everything.
And I don't want to listen.
Laid out real clear, and I don't want to sit and listen to people's testimony in Bible study or at a UFO conference or whatever.
Right.
And it's not my bag. So I tended to ignore it, and then all of a sudden this weekend I'm getting all of these emails from Catherine Fitz and Richard Dolan and Walter Bosley about and Daniel List, about this trademarking thing, and I'm thinking, my word, what's going on? I didn't know about your channel until all of these emails started coming in. Well, Dark Journalist is saying this, and Joe from the Carolinas is saying that, and CW Chanter. So I've been playing catch up this weekend and watching some of your videos and some of CW's videos, and I'm thinking, my word, this is nothing but, I don't think, a none too subtle attempt to shut down any free discussion. And the way it looks to me is that we have a trademark of a concept, which I can't wrap my head around that. How does that work? Right. Which has been part of the public narrative for decades. And the actual phrase secret space program, I think Dolan last night told me that somebody had used it way back in 1991. I
Yeah,
used the phrase in SS Brotherhood of the Bell in 2005. We've had 3 conferences, all predating the arrival of the blue aliens or whatever they are, and their sphere being alliance and their apostles and so on and so forth. And I'm thinking this can't be anything other than some sort of operation to try and shut all this down. And if they're successful in doing it in this little kind of fringe area that nobody really pays attention to, like ufology, if they're able to establish a precedent there, they can shut it down all across the board. I mean, forget about ufology. They can shut down the whole alternative press for not going along with trademark narratives. And this to me is very, very disturbing, and this comes out at the same time that Tom DeLonge brings out the Stars Academy. So this whole thing, number one, I think was kind of a reaction to those secret space program conferences that occurred in Amsterdam and then San Mateo and then Bastrop, Texas. Kind of a way to deflect attention from all of that.
maybe there was too much truth coming out in those early conferences. So, if there is indeed some kind of a psychological operation for disinformation or misinformation, not only are you saying they're trying to put a red herring into things through this whole SSP, but they're also trying to shift the narrative through these various groups who some of the people involved may not even know what in the heck's going on. I mean, we know through MK Ultra, the actual written Senate documentation on MK Ultra from, I think it was 78 or 79, that all of the subjects that were research participants did not know. They had no informed consent.
Right.
Why wouldn't that same process still be occurring in these social communities?
Right, and I think you're onto something there too. In fact, I just finished a new book about mind control.
Oh.
And that I think is definitely a possibility here. I don't know that much about Corey Goode. I haven't followed this whole story, but he seems to me, and I have a certain amount of sympathy for him.
I do too.
Which sounds kind of odd because it looks to me like, number one, every time I've seen him, he looks very sad.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like an individual that's been put on to a tiger and is trying to ride the tiger. The whole thing strikes me that way. It strikes me as there's a whole lot of mind manipulation going on here behind the scenes, in addition to establishing a marketing scheme to divert attention away from these things. And yeah, I do think those conferences were hitting a nerve because the people organizing them from the Netherlands were absolutely bound and determined to avoid inviting what, in the emails that I saw going back and forth, were trying to avoid what they were calling the divas. In other words, the people that were just telling a story, claiming to be an insider and having seen this or that. Right. They wanted to focus simply on people that were researching and coming to certain conclusions. So it gave those conferences a very, very different climate than the other typical UFO conferences, the few that I've been to. It was a very, very different climate. It was a much more elevated, serious climate. People were having serious discussions, in between the speakers and so on. It was very, very different from the normal UFO conferences that I've been to. There wasn't a lot of woo-woo stuff. There were people from that crowd that were trying to inject themselves into those conferences. Uh-huh. And they were just turned down. There were certain people that tried to invite themselves as speakers to those conferences. You can guess who. And they were just flatly turned down. Uh-huh. And there were also a couple of shills in the audience during the Q&A periods that were trying to inject that element to it. And again, they were just shut down. We weren't interested in revival tent meeting time testimony sharing stuff.
Yeah. We want real research. We want real evidence, sort of a higher level, not in terms of vibratory, but a higher level in terms of cognition. Let's advance the discussion. If we're, with your background in terms of even academics and the research that you're doing for your books, I mean, you may be doing some speculative history work, but your books are very impeccably cited in terms of where you're getting the source material from, which you're basing your theories and speculation on. And you're also very clear when you say you are speculating. So,
well, yeah, all those books are really exercises in argued speculation. There's not a one of them that isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is what I keep trying to remind people, and the other problem I've always had is, I've written a lot of books and, well, why didn't you say this in that book and so on and so forth? Well, the problem is no one wants to read a 10,000 page book. So I've always had in my head, I've always had this idea that there are certain books, I've got a list taped to my monitor of books that I want to write next. So I've always planned these things out. But the problem is that we're living in a culture where everybody is used to the soundbite and they want to get, this little thing and fit it into their narrative. And that's the thing I see going on with this this trademarking effort. And to a certain extent, I think with the TTSA people, they're laying out a narrative and they're trying to fit everything else out there into their narrative.
Yeah.
And that kind of bothers me. It's an attempt, I think, to use this trademark issue to create a precedent, to create a narrative, and then to be able to control it. I don't think it's going to work, quite frankly. The way, I don't know enough about the law to be absolutely certain, but it just seems to me that they're confusing trademark and copyright, and they're forgetting standard prior use of some of these terms. And this bothers me particularly. And C.W. Chanter made a very good point in one of his videos. I've been playing catch up this weekend, looking at all these videos about all of this that I didn't know was out there. But
forget about the nefarium. Welcome to the asylum here.
That's right. Well, yeah, I watched I watched your medication video.
The medication time, David Wilcock. Yeah.
Yes, I really liked that.
I was going to play that music for you.
Well, yeah, it's appropriate.
It would have been a copyright strike, unfortunately. But I can definitely certainly see where you're coming from as far as people getting a misinterpretation of where you're coming at with these issues based on the things that you've written in the past. I mean, yeah, you don't want a 1,000-page book. It's the same thing with some of the older videos that you might have been watching. It's like, I can't do like a 4-hour video.
Exactly.
Well, and plus your research, like 3 years, 10 years down the line, you find new stuff, right? So anyway.
Yeah, this happens all the time. If I'm writing a book, I run into material that is on the subject I'm writing about, but I really can't fit it into the book. So oftentimes that means I have to push it back into the next book I've got lined up to write about a particular topic. So, and you change your mind, you change your emphases, you change your approach to things over time. So, that's all just part of the natural part of research. And I know what you mean about the videos. You can't cover everything in one video. This is why I've been playing catch up this weekend, trying to watch some of your videos and C.W. Chanter, who I understand is an attorney.
He is an attorney, absolutely.
And he's made some very good points.
He's been calling it since 2015, just to give him that level of respect. And Cliff High's also been mentioning some things about that, so you might want to check out some of his stuff. I know Unirock has been calling them. Additionally, the thing about this TTSA that really rang alarm bells for me from a mind control possibility standpoint. And I definitely want to hear what you have to say on this, considering that this is the new book is based on sort of this topic of mind control. Is almost every person that is on the TTSA board of directors, like them or lump them, they've all got intelligence agency either commendations and awards or backgrounds. You know, CIA, DOD, NSA, counter intel. And then you've got these people who, this is the crazy thing, you've got all these neuroscientists who are part, like, directors of the traumatic brain injury program. And that person got to say, so what's really happening? What do you speculatively, because we don't want to come after people and make, you know, groundless accusations, but just in an imaginative way, theoretically, what might be happening behind the scenes from an intelligence agency standpoint if they were trying to actively employ mind control technology on these communities?
Well, I'll tell you the thing that really makes this a possibility for me, and Mr. Dolan mentioned that last night when we talked, and I went back and re-watched those interviews that he did with Bill Ryan at the Project Avalon forum. And Bill, and he had emailed Richard and I prior to doing those interviews about this whole phenomenon, that apparently his website and all of his forum posts had been surfed and mined. Thousands of hits had been mined. And the way I look at it is kind of in conjunction with Dark Journalist's hypothesis that what you're watching here are marketing operations. You're watching social engineering in the guise of marketing operations, which would explain the heavy presence of all these intelligence people in the TTSA board.
Yeah.
Because what they're doing, it appears to me, is they're going and looking at what are people talking about, and we're going to package and market to a narrative to two different groups in the ufology community. We're going to market to the New Age testimony, whistleblower, I had this contact experience crowd, and that to my mind is represented, if you want to speculate in this fashion, is represented by the Corey Goode people. And then you've got the more serious crowd that's interested in the nuts and bolts, the technology, the infrastructure, the financing, and that's Tom DeLonge's group.
So they cover both ends.
They're covering. That's the way it looks to me, honestly. You know, that's my hypothesis, that these two things are connected, and there are backers and controllers in the background that are pushing both of these things, because what you had emerging with those secret space program conferences, you had two things emerging. You had, first of all, a new conference culture that was being created, and quite successfully, in my opinion, because I spoke at two of them, not all three, but at two of them. And the other thing that was being created because of that was a community of more or less independent researchers. You know, we're all out here doing our own thing, but we're, you know, kind of aware of what each other's doing. So you were watching the emergence of a potential independent research community that, if it ever kind of organized or semi-organized, could be a potential threat to the narrative that they want to put out there.
I see.
And that to me is still now, Richard Dolan doesn't think so. You know, we talked last night, and he doesn't think that there's all that much of an op behind the TTSA thing. And, you know, he has his reasons, and they're legit.
Yeah.
But the way I look at it, is I'm kind of looking at it whole cloth here, and taking the cue from Dark Journalists that we're watching some pretty sophisticated marketing operations, and mining a project forum like Avalon would be the way that you would set up the data that you need to hit these points with these types of marketing operations. So I think it's much more sophisticated than apparently meets the eye at first glance. And this is why I find it all disturbing. They could use this whole thing, and again, C.W. Chandler made a very good point a couple days ago in one of the videos I watched, that, okay, let's assume that Corey Goode gets vested with these trademarks and then sells them to a company with deep financial pockets. So they may ultimately lose any litigation. But if the objective is to shut down independent researchers, the way you do that is you tie them up in all of this litigation. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think it's okay to have differing views. I mean, that's what makes us legitimate researchers, is that we are allowed to be able to have a hypothesis and acknowledge, like, yeah, I might have some evidence in this way. You might have some evidence. None of us really know what the heck's going on, but we're allowed to speculate.
Right.
I just want to tell folks in the chat room right now, because I have to tell you, Dr. Farrell, the chat room's streaming right now like crazy. And so for folks that have questions, we're gonna our moderators are gonna take those questions, and then in the last few minutes of the broadcast, when we have about 10 minutes left, we're gonna go ahead and have those questions posed to us, so that way we don't interrupt the interview. The one thing that I think has been really fascinating for me in sitting back and watching this whole business, Joseph, from a meta level, because I think people get wrapped up in the nuts and bolts, is at a meta level, this isn't going to go anywhere. In other words, it's not like it's going to stop.
Right.
It's going to keep on going. It's not going to leave our community, the issue. And so when we begin to confront the issue of, okay, are we going to trademark and copyright things? Well, your books, do you have copyrights on your books?
Well, my publishers do, but the problem here is, I approach this academically.
Yeah.
When you do academic research, you can do one of two things if you're writing a PhD thesis or something, and that is you can either discover something new, or you can offer a new synthesis of material that's out there. And my approach has always been, well, let's look at all of this data and synthesize it in a different way. Now, can I copyright that and trademark it? Well, probably not, because the reason you can't is another researcher is going to take the same data and take even perhaps some of your own synthesis and create something different with it.
Interesting.
And that's how research moves forward. So, if I wanted to shut down everybody, which I don't want to do, that, I would do that. But that's not what I want to do. And if you apply the same principle as what I think is going on with this whole trademarking issue, that appears to me exactly what they want to do, denials notwithstanding. And like I say, that could be a precedent that could be used to shut down areas of discussion all across the board, not just in ufology, conspiracy theory, history, sociology, what have you, political science. You could shut down all sorts of discussion. And it's intriguing to me, and Richard Dolan made a very good point last night when we were talking, that, this phenomenon is not unique to the ufology community with this trademark issue. It's going on right now all across the board. We've seen several people in the alternative media community, if you want to use that term, that have been, quote unquote, deplatformed for, a variety of ultimately stupid reasons in order to shut down narratives or topics that certain people don't want to be talked about. And, that to me is the pillar of our progress, of our research community, alternative or otherwise, is the ability to have free discussions, to publish our books, put them out there, let people say, no, that's nuts, and here's my book in response. If we shut down discussion, we're going to get absolutely nowhere, and we're going to get nowhere in a big hurry, especially in ufology.
Oh, you bet, because there's so much stigma that has been built and associated with ufology as well as alternative history. I mean, look at some of the work, that Graham Hancock has done, some of the references in your Giza Death Star book. It's like, there are serious real world consequences for some of these legal injunctions or movements that are happening. And I'm not an expert in the law, but I do know that language, when we control language and we control the words that people use, we can change the behavior. As an example, as somebody that makes content here on YouTube, I do all kinds of exhaustive research with the help of my team to do all kinds of subjects. Right. And if I use the words dulce bass, in my video, in my title, right? You know, the underground alien base in Dulce, New Mexico. I'm sure you've heard of the theory.
Mm-hmm.
YouTube will pull that out of my speech, out of the transcript, and they will put a link to Wikipedia under the video that says their link to the Dulce base conspiracy theory.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, this is happening.
Well, look, you know, since you mentioned Wikipedia, according to Wikipedia, at one time they completely removed any English language references to me. And then they came out and said, no, I really don't have a degree from Oxford. And I even Xeroxed it, you know, so that they could see, yeah, I do. You know? And
I went through it.
Yeah, you know, I went through that nightmare, so don't take that away from me. But you know, these platforms and these social media things are getting out of hand, and I think at some point they're going to have to be regulated as public utilities. I don't see any way around it to prevent this kind of thing from happening. Mm-hmm. The mere mention of something is not a copyright violation.
Right.
You know, and all the more so if you're attributing a source. And that's the other problem. We're also in a culture, you know, they're going to put an epitaph on my gravestone. He lived for footnotes. because, you know, because I go out of my way to document, you know, where I'm getting things from. And, you know, if somebody else out there is doing good research and they're in my bibliography, I like to tell them. I like to say, this is an essential book. You know, you got to have this book if you're going to talk about this subject, blah, blah, blah. Because, you know, there's a lot of people in this research community, and we're busily trying to put all of this stuff out. So let's cite and reference other people's work if we're pulling on their ideas or something like that. You know, that's just second nature.
Yeah.
To me as an academic. And I see so much going on in the alternative community where people will put out a book and it's full of all of this stuff and there's not a footnote in it. Where is this stuff coming from? You know?
Right. Exactly. I mean, and here's the other thing. It's even if people don't believe in academics and they think that, you know, the ivory towers, it's all a conspiracy theory and whatever. Okay, that's fine. But what about the ethic of giving credit, right? Would you want someone to do that, to steal that from you and then say, oh, that's my idea? It's not good for the soul.
It's not good for the soul, and it's not good for the community, because there are informed people in the community that can look at something and say, well, they got that from so-and-so, you know,
right.
And they're not mentioning it. I get that all the time. And it bothers me, but it's not, you know, it's not so much, I think, by design. I think it's just because standards have fallen so woefully low during all of this rush to get this person deplatformed and that person deplatformed. Standards have just fallen very, very low. And it bothers me. It's a cultural phenomenon. I don't think it's a big, dark conspiracy or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it does bother me when I see this kind of effort being put into trademarking something that people have been talking about for decades. The concept itself has been talked about since, you know, Major Kehoe first started writing his ufology books back in the 50s and 60s. So it's been around for a very long time, and you know, there's been a lot of researchers that have contributed to it. You know, not just Dolan or Catherine Fitz. You know, this research has been going on for a very long time. So I don't see how this is ultimately going to stand, but I think you're onto something, because what it's going to do is it's creating this vacuum that's sucking all the energy of the community right now into that.
Right,
and that disturbs me too. You know, the Stars Academy, the thing that I liked about your video about that was you went into all of the business plan and all these people that were connected to it. And, you know, I'm thinking, how in the name of sense are they going to build a ship for $55 million? Ain't gonna happen.
It's impossible.
No, it's impossible. And you know, Catherine Fitz has been hammering this home ever since she started her site about the missing trillions of dollars. She has been at this for over a decade, if not 2 decades. And finally, people are taking her seriously because Dr. Skidmore at the University of Michigan, I think it was, went out and looked at it and said, "Oh my word, she's right. There really are missing trillions." In the federal.
She had data. I mean, this is not theory. This is data. No. She was a researcher. Not entertainment.
No, she's. Let me tell you, she's hard to keep up with. You know. Because she's got all of these facts just kind of on command in her head,
Right. Well, it's almost like your counterpart in terms of how we apply our mind and how we connect dots. And so what she excels in is sort of that area. It was like, let's look at the economics of this. I mean, and to build a UFO for, what was it, $50-some million? Look, folks, the cost of a stealth aircraft, one aircraft, is $929 million, according to Northrop Grumman, and that was in 1997 dollars. And now they've just decommissioned the stealth aircraft.
Yep. You couldn't build an SR-71 for $55 million.
All right.
You couldn't. You just can't do it. So I'm wondering, what really is that program all about? What is really going on here? And again, I think it goes back to this marketing op, an effort to control a narrative and inject themselves, because the one thing that really emerged from those secret space program conferences was they were beginning to lose control of that narrative.
Is that right?
In my opinion, I think that's what was happening, because you had Dolan, you had Dr. Carol Rosen, you had Peter Levenda, you had Richard Hoagland.
You were there, Bosley.
I was there, Bosley. So, you put all these people together over those 3 space program conferences, and what was emerging was there's this whole body of independent research out there that people were being familiarized with. And, it wasn't the standard go to the UFO Congress in Laughlin and listen to 16 hours of people telling their testimony about their latest encounter. It was something very, very different, and they were losing control. And I think the timing of these things coming out as they did in 2015 with Good and so on, as a kind of response to those secret space program conferences, there's no doubt in my mind, again, a hypothesis here, there's no doubt in my mind that what we're watching is something that is in reaction to what was beginning to emerge in those conferences.
It certainly did. The whole secret space program popularization, on Gaia TV, it certainly did throw a big balloon in front of everybody's eyes to block what they were looking at. And any, I think, genuine researcher would at least examine that kind of stuff and say, I think it's a bunch of bunk, or I'm interested, but where's your data?
Right.
Now, if you're on the experiencer end, consume, that's your thing. But ufology being, I don't want to say taken over, but outweighed by different marketing or commercial interests. Maybe we as consumers within ufology need to be more discerning, not only in what stories we like and don't like, but also more discerning in what we consume and what we don't consume.
Right. I would definitely agree with that. That was really, as far as my own personal involvement with those conferences was concerned, was one of the things that I was hoping would come out of that, is just build up some awareness that there's another whole body of literature out there about that subject than one is normally exposed to in ufology. And again, it's very important for people to understand here, I don't consider myself a ufologist. I'm kind of on the periphery of it because some of the things I've researched have touched upon it. And, my whole, what I call my Nazi series of books, and there's a lot of them. That whole thing was really an effort to subject that whole post-war mythology that was coming out of certain neo-Nazi circles in Europe and Latin America, was to subject all of that to a review and try and tell a very different, in my opinion, truer story about what was really going on with all of that stuff. Because that's another thing that percolated into the ufology community, and you had people, accepting Haunebu and Vril. And I have to tell you a story.
Please.
When I first wrote Reich of the Black Sun and sent it off to my publisher, David Childress is the publisher. The book came out, and he sent me my complimentary copies, and he had stuck in pictures of Haunebu and Vril in the book without me knowing about it.
Yo, you didn't even know about that?
No, I didn't even know about that. So those pictures in the book are not me. And I told him, David, do not do this. I know where I want to go here. Do not add things to my books that you think I'm going down this road. I'm not going there. I'm going in exactly the opposite direction. But and I made that clear in subsequent books. Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops being the one where I address that whole thing. But the problem with that is, with that whole Nazi meme, is that got injected into ufology, and it was never subjected to any sort of very critical review other than by people like Dolan or Stanton Friedman and so on. And even there wasn't an attempt really to delve into that whole viper's nest in much detail. So that's what I did. But I don't consider myself a ufologist simply because that's not my primary focus. But I am concerned about what I see going on with this whole trademark thing, because, again, it looks to me like they're trying to fashion a narrative and drive it back into the ridiculous so that people won't take it seriously. And it's a very serious subject.
It is.
It's a very serious subject.
I mean, I think that your example of what's happened with the World War II German Nazi Antarctic base and that whole that whole narrative, and we were talking about this. My research team and I did a Antarctic base deep dive series, and we started doing, and so it was like, and I wore a nice hat, by the way, you might like it. But what we found was that there were just discrepancies within the narrative. I mean, all over the place. But now I have people saying Joseph P. Farrell proves that there is an underground Nazi UFO base there.
No, I don't prove any. I don't even believe it.
Uncensored, uncensored Joseph Farrell.
Uncensored, right here. You heard it. No, I don't believe that. I never have believed that, and I'll tell you why. And I've said this in interviews over and over again until I'm blue in the face. The reason why is, number one, if you look at the one technology for which there is some arguably speculative case to be made, that they were experimenting in that type of exotic physics, that's the story of the Nazi Bell, which I've written a lot about.
That's the Glock.
That Die Glocke, yeah. And the thing about that is if you get into the details, and this is based on Igor Vitkovsky's publications and research back in the 1990s.
Great book.
It's a great book. Yes, it is. It's just chock full of mind-bending, blood-curdling details about
energy rays and death rays.
Yes, yeah, they were into it all, folks. But anyway, when you get into the details of the story, one of the things that Vitkovsky points out was that the facility at which they were testing the Bell, the Nazis built an entire power plant right there.
Oh.
And I'm thinking, okay, why are they doing that? Well, I came to the conclusion, based on some other details, that they needed a whole lot of direct current electricity. You know, the old Thomas Edison scheme for electrifying America was direct current electricity. Sure. It would have been an environmental nightmare, folks, because we would have had a power plant every 3 miles. You know? Thank goodness Tesla saved us from that.
No doubt.
But, that's the conclusion I came to. So, based on that, this is the only story for which there's enough detail that you can give it some credence. Well, if the Nazis are building some super secret research base in Antarctica to continue researching this stuff, they're going to have to build a power plant to do it.
That's right.
And, then I get the argument from people that say, well, they could have used 0-point energy. And the problem there is you're introducing an hypothesis into the mix that, number one, has no evidence for it, and number two, the only thing that does remotely touch on that is, again, the Bell story. So there's no way around this. The other problem with the Antarctic base, and I've said this until I'm blue in the face, is...
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, sorry. I just
show,
before, I want you to keep going on your point there, but just even on the power generation thing. Additionally, the other argument is not only 0 point, but there's also the argument that he's geothermal. Well, where that base was said to have been, the Queen Maud's land, right? The Mueller-Kaufman Mountains. There is no active fault line, volcanic fault line in that area. It's on the totally opposite southeastern side of Antarctica. You can't you can't do that. Anyway.
Yeah, the only thing that they may have found as they're doing their photogrammetry reconnaissance missions over that, they may have found some warm lakes or something in the interior. Right. But again, that's hypothesis, because we have never to this day seen any of the pictures that the Germans were taking as they were doing their photo reconnaissance mapping of that particular part of Antarctica. That has never ever surfaced. So we don't know exactly what happened. But I can tell you the other part of the problem here is, well, could you at least go along with a secret U-boat base? The problem here is you're talking about the German Kriegsmarine mounting a logistical operation to base and staff and supply a base in Antarctica as they're fighting World War II.
Just a little thing that got in their way.
Just a little thing that got in their way, the little thing called the Royal Navy, folks. and the idea of mounting a military logistical operation of that magnitude just to sustain a base for submarines in Antarctica, there ain't no way that the German Navy could do it, let alone the Royal Navy or the American Navy. It's just not militarily, operationally feasible, folks. And I've said this until I'm blue in the face. No one seems to be getting this. I have never said this. I never have it. This whole mythology. I'll tell you where it's coming from. This whole mythology of Nazi bases in Antarctica is coming out of a narrow circle of post-war neo-Nazis. Mm-hmm. Some of them are based in Canada with what's his name, Friedrich something or other, and his weird little press. Yeah. And then there's a circle of neo-Nazis in and around Vienna and Munich after the war that are putting out all of this stuff about Hannibal and Vril and last battalions and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's where this is coming from. And I review all of that in Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops. Okay. That's where this is coming from. Now, there is one aspect of the story that may or may not be true, and that's this idea that the Germans in their Type 21 U-boats had a last-ditch battle with the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy has always denied that this ever took place. But the problem with that narrative is you had a number of submarines at the end of the war, some of them quite sophisticated, that were carrying cargo from Europe down to southern Argentina. And during World War I, this is what most people don't know, the head of the Abwehr, Admiral Canaris, Wilhelm Canaris, he was actually with Admiral von Spee's squadron that was coming from the Far East and then, fought the Battle of Coronel and then was sunk by the British off of the Falkland Islands in 1914. Mm-hmm. But Commander Canaris was deputized to look for submarine bases, coves, and bays that could be used as secret bases while that mission occurred. And he eventually becomes, of course, the head of the German counterintelligence called Abwehr during World War II. And I think there might be some traction that maybe we have not been told the entire story of this late war and even post-war Nazi U-boat activity off of southern Argentina. That's a very different thing from Antarctica. But, people don't listen.
They don't listen to you. They just read what they want and then speculate further. And then, I appreciate that you're clearing that up, because I think I've personally been contacted by a lot of folks, good folks, that just have gotten the wrong misunderstanding. And for those of you out there that are wondering, well, how is this related to, the title of this video, the secret space program and UFO disclosure PSYOP? Well, it's related because one of the key pillars of the secret space program entertainment narrative is that the Nazis set up a base with the reptilians, according to Michael Salla, in Antarctica, and that is where they have their spaceport. And that's where everything happens down there. So here's the thing. My standpoint, and I'm guessing yours too, Dr. Farrell, is that if one of those pillars, if one of those foundations of that particular myth isn't legitimate, then all you're left with is another myth. And where's the facts?
Story?
It's a story. So maybe
go
ahead.
Well, what I pointed out at the San Mateo conference, and I went through this Nazi aspect of secret space program in as near exhaustive depth as I could possibly do in 2 books. One of them is called Roswell and the Reich, and the other one is Nazi International. Because when you look at the post-war activity of where and what the Nazis are up to, number one, they're not doing it in Antarctica. Okay. They're doing it in Argentina, and they're doing it for Juan Perón. Now, there is a connection here to Roswell, because when General Shulgin, the Air Force intelligence chief at the time, General Shulgin, when he writes that intelligence collection memorandum in September of 1947 that all ufology cites all the time, but they don't like to look at the whole document. He points out that the UFOs that he's talking about are vectored jet turbine craft. They're not advanced field propulsion, anti-gravity, Haunebu Vril flying saucers. Okay, number one, that's the first thing. Okay. And therefore, they're not interplanetary, folks. And number two, he points out that we have to find out where the Horton brothers are. It's just right there in the memo. And the Horton brothers are these Nazi aerodynamics engineers that built these big flying wings. All right. Well, it just so happens that I know where the Horton brothers were. They were in Argentina, and they were and they were building all of this stuff for Juan Perón. Okay.
Wow.
So again, it's not Antarctica, folks. I'm sorry, Dr. Salla. There is no evidence. Period. End of sentence.
Bam.
There ain't any.
Bam.
Yeah.
And
bam.
Follow the logic, folks. It's very
Follow
easy.
the logic here. It's very easy. Yeah. Don't just read one of my books and think you've got the whole picture of what I think about Nazis.
Yeah.
I wrote gobs of Nazi books, and the problem is, it's like I told my publisher, well, how many more books have you got? Well, I've got several lined up. Well, why don't you just write this all in one book? Because no one wants to read a 3,000-page book.
Well,
it's very simple.
And gosh only knows how many pictures they put in there without telling you too.
Yeah, well, after that, he didn't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Because I pitched a blue hissy fit because I just no. But anyway, no, the Antarctic secret space program thing, the only evidence for something connected to secret space activity in Antarctica, as far as I'm concerned, is the presence of Lockheed Martin down there.
Now, that is suspicious.
Yeah, that's highly suspicious.
It's legit. I mean, it is legit. They're there.
Yeah, they are.
They
are. But Nazis, no. No.
Yeah, and speaking from a standpoint of a PSYOP, right, a distraction, wouldn't it be great if all the people that are relatively intelligent, that are kind of conspiracy analysts, as I call us, it's got a better positive ring, it's like get the conspiracy analysts focused on Antarctica, but associate it with something that in culture, Nazis is now something that people have a hard time talking about.
Right.
And so then it's like, oh, well, why are you talking about the Nazis? Right. And it's like, well, because there's a historical narrative here that's not true.
Right.
And are they doing that with the secret space stuff is what I'm wondering.
I think you're onto something there, because the way I look at it, the whole Nazi Antarctica thing is a diversion precisely to keep people from looking at what the Nazis were up to in South America.
Mm-hmm.
There's a statement that was attributed to Grand Admiral Dönitz that we're building a palace for the Fuhrer or something like this, a fortification,
ice fortress,
an ice fortress, and everybody assumes that he's referring to Antarctica. Now, Dönitz, as far as I know, did make a similar statement, but not quite exactly the one that's always quoted, and the one I quoted in Reich of the Black Sun. But where the Nazis actually based most of their post-war research activity, if you want to call it that, is in Patagonia, in southern Argentina, in and around the town of San Carlos de Bariloche, which in the wintertime is pretty freaking cold, you know, French. But again, the Antarctic thing is a deflection to keep people, in my opinion, from looking at, well, you've got Kurt Tonk, you've got the Horton brothers, you've got Emile de Wettin, all down there in Antarctica building all of this exotic aircraft for Juan Perón. And in addition, you've got Ronald Richter down there doing his wacky fusion experiments.
You're right.
Yeah. So
connect the dots. Precisely. And you throw Shulgin's memo that came out after Roswell into the mix, and to me, the way the narrative looks was they were deliberately trying to steer things away from too close of a look at what was going on down there in Argentina. You can even throw Alan Dulles into the mix here. Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
How does he connect? Yeah, how does he connect?
Well, I talk about it in Nazi International. There was a fellow by the name, a Hungarian-American journalist by the name of Ladislas Farrago, who had worked for the OSS during World War II, and then published a book in the late 1970s called Aftermath, Martin Bormann and the Fourth Reich. And it was all about Bormann being tracked by the Argentine Central de Inteligencia, their version of the CIA, being tracked in his movements throughout South America. And he even produced some of the documents in his book. And he was just absolutely, as you can imagine, just absolutely panned, denounced as a conspiracy monger. None of this was true. I think even the New York Times ran a couple of op-ed pieces about this. And an American journalist by the name of Paul Manning, who was a close friend at the time with Edward Murrow, the pre-Cronkite on CBS. Paul Manning was so incensed at the way that his friend Farrago had been treated, he followed up with his own investigation, and he published a book called Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile. And in the preface of the book, he mentions the fact that when he had the book done and he had his galleys ready, he made an appointment to see Alan Dulles and showed him the book, and writes in the preface that Dulles came back and told him, well, you're on the right track. And that's all Dulles said. But in the book, I have to tell this story because I've told it many times before, but I have to tell your listeners.
Please.
In the book, he mentions an episode which, when I read it, I was just floored. That in the late 1950s or early 60s, I'm not familiar with the date at this stage anymore, but sometime in that time period, a check for $2 million had been cleared through Manufacturers Hanover and Chase Manhattan Bank. The check was cleared by Deutsche Bank in Buenos Aires, and the check was written over Martin Bormann's own signature.
Unbelievable. Now that's something.
That's something, yeah. you know,
Jeez.
yeah, that puts the suspicion meter into the red zone.
It does. It's
about
off,
what's
it's off
going
the
on.
charts.
It's off the charts, right?
Um,
But yeah, there's all of this stuff going down in Latin America. But again, folks, it ain't Antarctica.
It ain't Antarctica. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I've got to start our timer here. And what I would say is, folks, we may have some questions prepared, and we probably make this more of a lightning round so we can get some in. Jay writes in and wants to know if you have any opinion at this point in time on the missing 411 phenomenon, the strange disappearances and strange drownings. Do you know anything about that?
Oh, the David Paulides research,
As well as the William Ramsey research and Steph Young and all that good stuff. Yeah.
I'm only familiar with David Paulides' books. I do have an opinion on it. I think, number one, it's a genuine phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Number two, many of those disappearances are so bizarre that I either have to write them down to very strange natural phenomena that no one understands, like Bermuda Triangle or Devil's Triangle or what have you, or there's some sort of very exotic technology in play, because people just don't go poof.
Right.
And in some of these cases, that's what happens. They literally are walking in a line, someone turns around, and someone else who's been following them is no longer there. They're just gone.
They're gone.
They're just gone. So yeah, I think it's a genuine phenomenon, and those are my two best guesses.
All right. And then we've got also, you're asking some very serious questions here, folks, which is great. What is the true extent of Operation Paperclip?
Huge.
And the person says Knights of Malta and Nazi German ties. Why did they toss Forrestal out the window? I don't know if there's a connection between Paperclip.
Oh my God. Yeah, there is. I talk about Forrestal in connection with Antarctica and Operation High Jump because most people do not know. Well, first of all, let's look at Forrestal's friends. He is a close friend with John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and he's a close friend with Senator Joseph McCarthy. Mm-hmm. And if you look at where they all die or end up, well, McCarthy ends up dead at Bethesda in very mysterious and I strongly suspect suspicious circumstances. Forrestal also ends up dead at Bethesda, supposedly having jumped out of the window.
Yeah, that was just very strange because he was in a hospital. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got all of the strange stuff about JFK's autopsy at Bethesda.
Right.
So yeah, something's not good at Bethesda, folks. Don't end up sick there. But anyway,
no doubt. This is gallows humor, folks. No disrespect.
Yeah, this is gallows humor. Yeah. But the interesting thing about Forrestal is his connection with High Jump, because when you look at the people that were involved in the planning of Operation High Jump, and I put this in the Hess and the Penguins book, it was Secretary of the Navy John Forrestal, the Chief of the Naval Staff, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz.
Whoa.
Yeah, whoa.
That's huge.
That's
huge.
That's huge.
Absolutely, mate. That is a huge operation.
That's a huge operation.
We got to do a FOIA request on that.
Yeah, it's definitely there. And then some vice admiral, I forget his name, and then of course Admiral Byrd.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, their explanation for this was, well, the next war could be fought in Arctic conditions, so we need to test our training, our tactics, our equipment. Right. And so we're going to go all the way down there to Antarctica with a battalion of Marines and a fleet. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, we've got Alaska, that's much closer to hand. You can test all of your equipment there in Arctic conditions. Why do you need to go to the expense to go down there to Antarctica to do all of this? So there's something wrong with the story. And then, just to put the icing on the cake, Dark Journalist told me about a book where he discovered that Admiral Byrd's nephew, Colonel Byrd, was one of the owners of Here It Comes, the Texas School Book Depository.
Unbelievable.
In Dallas.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it is.
That's a bombshell.
That's a bombshell, yeah. And I went out and bought the book, and sure enough, right there.
Yeah. Was it
right
well?
there.
Was it well cited? Did it have
It,
footnotes?
no, it wasn't well cited, but it's one of those books that's more of a report on people investigating a story.
I
So in other
gotcha.
words, it's not an academic book, but it's a journalistic type of research book, which
Sure.
is got a different flavor to it. But yeah, that you can verify that Colonel Byrd was one of the principal owners in the Texas School Book Depository.
Absolutely
So
fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
JFK knows Forrestal, and Forrestal takes a tumble out the window at Bethesda and was involved in high jump. And to just sweeten that little pot a little bit more, Admiral Byrd's nephew was, and I put this in the Hess book, was going to a honorarium for his father, or it was his son, I think it was, not his nephew, for his father, down in Washington, D.C., and never arrived, and turned up dead in a warehouse being investigated as a homicide by a Baltimore detective. And that's as far as I've been able to trace the story. So something's going on there. And I don't think it's just penguins.
Right. No, there's way too many coincidences around the same period of time happening among people that were rubbing elbows with each other.
Right.
Something's up. I think we got time for one more question because we got to shut down very soon. And this, I think, would probably relate to the content of your new book coming out on mind control. Can you ask Dr. Farrell about scalar tech and voice to skull?
Yeah. Scalar, in the way that it's used in physics, the way I use it, is it stands for a zero-summed vector field. So in other words, you take all your vectors and they sum to zero at a particular point. But at that point, you still have an infolded magnitude of pure energy. That's what a scalar potential is. It's not a vector. It's not a transmission of force from one point to another. It's just an infolded magnitude of energy at a particular point. You can use that to create, you can set up an interference pattern in the human brain and establish a beat frequency. And the beat frequency allows you to modulate information on that frequency. So in other words, you can literally project voices into people's.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this technology has been out there. There are patents you can look at publicly. It's in the new book called Microcosm and Medium.
Microcosm and Medium.
Right, it's on my website.
Okay, great.
You can do this very, very easily, but it requires an interferometry pattern. Think of the Cuban embassy attacks where people are complaining about hearing noises on their bed. They get out of bed and they move away and the noise stops. Well, to me, that was a dead giveaway right there, that you're using interferometry on a particular region. And if you step outside of that region, you step outside of that interferometry and the pattern ceases.
And that's serious. Those people got sick, and that was in mainstream media.
Yes, it was in mainstream media.
Yeah.
And they finally have now admitted, yeah, it's some sort of electronic weapon. Oh, really? Duh.
You're right. McFly.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much, folks. I'm sorry that we ran out of time. Dr. Farrell, thank you so much yourself for being on the broadcast here and joining me here in my asylum. You're more than welcome to come back anytime. I feel like we could go for hours and hours and just kind of unpack this thing. Any final words in paying homage to the idea of a PSYOP that may be occurring in the secret space program and UFO disclosure world? Any last minute words of advice for folks out there watching?
Fight this trademark thing.
All right.
It just can't happen, because if it's allowed to happen, it'll shut everybody down, not just ufology. It's just got to be stopped.
Thank you very much.
So, yeah, thank you for having me on, and look forward to doing it again.
And we'll tip our hat. Folks, remember now, when you're confronting PSYOPs in secret space programs and ufology, let's do it with some reason, logic, common sense, and a healthy sense of humor. Take care, y'all. Bye.